second chance. I've never quite managed to misjudge the time as badly as I did a few weeks ago. So what I want to do today is finish up on Mandalay and the end of Mandalay as the capital of an independent Burmese kingdom. Then spend about a third of the time on the Burmese objects from the museum's own collection that are going to be in the Emerald Cities show this coming fall. And then the last third will be focusing on our wonderful Burmese throne shrine that's over there in gallery number 11. So you remember where Mandalay is, its situation in Southeast Asia. You recall that we were up to the period of King Mindon, who reigned from the 1850s to the 1870s, and you recall that it was his successor, Thibaw, under whom the British conquest took place, and in 1885 Mandalay was conquered. The Burmese kingdom was no more after the end of 1885. But we're going to spend a moment on King Mindon because perhaps you remember my saying that Burma had not been particularly lucky, it seems, in its rulers in the 19th century. There had been a couple of pretty good ones, but there were a couple of pretty bad ones. Either there were a couple who seemed to have lost their minds, whatever that exactly meant in 19th century Burmese or British terms, and do not seem to have been very productive or good for their kingdoms. Mindon was a very smart and capable man. He seems to have been quite reasonable. He seems to have grasped the British threat, because he came to the throne just after the Second Anglo-Burmese War, in which all of Lower Burma, that is the area around Rangoon and the whole Delta region and the whole southern part of the country, had been taken away from the Burmese kingdom and had become part of British India. So Mindon, having lived through that very recently, was realistic about the threats of British power, and was more accommodating, more compromising than some of his predecessors had been. And really, the Burmese kingdom at this point had very little choice. Just to remind you, of course, also it was Mindon who moved the capital from Amarapura to Mandalay starting in 1857, and it took a couple of years for the movement of the capital, rebuilding of the capital in this new place to be finished. I wanted to remind you of the appearance of part of the royal palace with this amazing tall tiered tower on it that symbolically marks the throne and this part of the palace as the center of the universe. And here's the throne underneath that tower. I showed it to you last time, and I just wanted to remind you, because we'll be coming back to the subject of thrones. These are 19th century photographs, because most of the buildings in Mandalay do not survive. They were either destroyed early on, or they were pulled down after they decayed, or a lot were destroyed in World War II. So not many of the original royal buildings and religious buildings of Mandalay survive, even though they were only built in the 1860s and 1870s. Back to King Mindon just for a moment. This is one of the giant complexes of buildings that he built, and what we're seeing is a whole succession of these individual shrines, each one of which shelters a large stone inscription, and the entire Pali Tripitaka was written out on these stone tablets and enshrined. The individual stone tablets, over 700 of them, to incorporate the entire Burmese Buddhist canon of Buddhist religious works. They were, each one of these shelters one of these big stone inscriptions that's covered with part of the Burmese Buddhist canon written out, carved into the surface of the stone. So King Mindon seems to have been pious personally. He took his responsibilities as a Buddhist ruler very seriously. As you recall, it was during his reign in 1857 when the year 2400 of the Burmese Buddhist calendar arrived, and these anniversaries were very, very important, and they could, of course, be dangerous. So it was important that the king be exercising piety, making donations and so on to counteract any possible ill effects of the arrival of this anniversary. Then I just wanted to show you a few 19th century photographs of some of the buildings in Mandalay. Again, most of them do not survive, so we're really having to envision a lost world because most of these buildings no longer exist. Amazing, great, the buildings we've just been looking at are brick and stucco. These, of course, are wood, usually lacquered and gilded or partly gilded. And really amazing buildings. And too bad that more of them do not survive for us to see. Covered, of course, with very elaborate and often very, very beautiful wood carving. And a number of the objects in our exhibition probably came from some of these buildings, or at least are very closely of the same type. And I'll show them to you more in a few minutes, and I'll refer back to some of these views of these buildings. Amazing, a wood carving of the very highest order. A lot of it is teak, of course, because the lumber industry and teak harvesting was a very important industry of Burma, and it was the British, of course, were interested in timber as well for shipbuilding and for all kinds of other things. And so one of the issues between the British and the Burmese were the Burmese giving from the British point of view, giving enough access to the teak forests? Were they selling teak on favorable terms to the British? Were they sending enough supply of timber and logs to the British? So, of course, in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s, just as today, control of rare resources like timber or like oil loom very large in international politics. Another part of the life and the surroundings of Mandalay that we have a hard time reconstructing because there aren't even very many photographs is the amazing ceremonial that went on. Royal ceremonial and religious ceremonial was extremely important. What we're looking at here is the funerary structure for a high-ranking monk. And so we just have to call up in our minds, imagine as best we can the ceremonies for which an amazing structure like this would be constructed. Here are human figures down here, you see. So it's absolutely enormous, and it has this stepped pyramidal lower part that, of course, refers to the ideas of Mount Meru and so on and so on, cosmic symbolism, giant bird, and then this amazing superstructure. So it's only these very rare photographs, such as this one, that give us some hint of the extremely elaborate parades and ceremonies and rituals that were taking place both at court and in religious contexts, state ceremonies. Here's a very nice, I think, photograph of a well-to-do Burmese family in the days of Mandalay, just to give you a sense of what a well-to-do family, of course, would have looked like. Here's the house of a high-ranking nobleman, obviously nobody except the richest and most powerful would have such a large and elaborate house as this. Typically for Southeast Asian houses all over, through almost all of Southeast Asia, the house is raised up on pilings. This is just sort of basketry that's covering up the lower part. But if you took this off, you would see that the whole thing is raised up on pilings like that. And the pigs and the chickens and so on live underneath typically. It's raised up because there are floods, and so it helps you avoid floods. And also it's cooler and it helps with ventilation to have the house raised up on pilings or stilts in this way. Now, could you gentlemen back there turn the lights down another notch or two? King Mindon died and was succeeded by King Thebaw. Here's King Thebaw and his extremely powerful wife, who seems to have had enormous power and influence at court. The British didn't like her, and a lot of Burmese didn't like her either, because she and her own family had enormous power that they wielded apparently rather ruthlessly. Thebaw rather was a seemingly kind of ordinary young man. Of course, he had been raised in the lap of luxury, but he does not seem to have had his predecessors' determination or knowledge or breadth of worldview. A little bit of a slacker, it seems like. Also in the 1870s, he was persuaded by people at court, including some of his wife's family, to massacre 40 of his half-brothers and half-sisters. And this was a bad old tradition in a lot of monarchies in Asia and elsewhere to some extent too. But because your sisters and brothers or half-sisters and half-brothers could conceivably be alternatives to yourself as the monarch, it was unfortunately not entirely uncommon to slaughter them all. This happened at the Persian court and in a variety of places. So Thebaw, anyway, either ordered or allowed to be ordered the capturing and slaughtering of 40 of the other royal heirs or potential heirs. And this did him no good at all, because it didn't endure him to other people at court and to his own population. And of course, it got into the newspapers in London. And Thebaw and the people around him at court did not understand the worldwide political situation that they were in well enough to know that this kind of massacre would get into the papers in London and would provide more of a pretext, if any more were already needed, that the Burmese kingdom is incapable of governing itself in a civilized way. It's run by a bunch of barbaric, homicidal maniacs, and we, the British, need to step in and stop this and take over and bring order and civilization to a kingdom that would allow 40 members of the royal family to be slaughtered. This is something in the museum's collection that's never been exhibited before. It's sections of just this kind of royal court ensemble, and this will be in our exhibition in the fall. The conservators just now are working on it and making the very tiny, it was for quite a small person. We don't know whether it was for a boy or a girl of 10 or 12 years old. A young prince or princess. Our conservators are making the tiny body form and covering it with cloth so that the court costume can be shown on a body form, whatever you call those things, so to give a sense of how it draped and how the parts worked and so on. So it'll be wonderful to see this. The British had been itching for an opportunity, it seems, an excuse to conquer Upper Burma and take over Mandalay. And there were a number of issues, some of them seemingly serious and some of them pretexts. As you remember from last time, there was an ongoing controversy, the so-called shoe controversy. As you know, in Southeast Asian royal courts, if you entered the king's presence, you were supposed to take off your shoes. The British didn't want to take off their shoes. This had been an issue for more than 100 years of diplomatic negotiation about whether and when British envoys were going to have to take off their shoes upon entering the royal presence. So this continued. The Burmese do not seem to have been clever about it. I mean, if, you know, at some point you say, okay, we're not going to struggle about shoes anymore. You know, if that's what it takes to get you to leave us alone, we're going to forget about the shoe issue. But they couldn't. Everyone was very dug in on the shoe issue. And then the Burmese had been negotiating with both the French and the Italians, and that worried the British. And of course it gave the British the opportunity to say the Burmese may ally themselves with our competitors, the French or the Italians. Therefore we need to go in and do something about this. And then there were a whole long range of commercial issues about the Burmese not providing access to this raw material or that raw material, or taxing them too high, or not facilitating the upriver, downriver trade, and so on. So there was a whole long list of issues. Finally, the British decided to go in. The Burmese were caught off guard. The Burmese, Thibaw and his court, do not seem to have grasped how serious the threat was, and the extent to which the British were just waiting to go in. The British military for years had been doing wargaming and contingency planning about the moment, when the moment would be right to invade Burma and conquer Mandalay. And the Burmese seem to have been completely unaware of this. They didn't figure out that the British were planning and getting ready and training and laying in supplies and just waiting for the moment. I wanted to read you a couple of sentences out of the Times of London. This is December 3rd, 1885. Just as the British invasion was in process of getting going. The Times of London said, our duty in such circumstances, and that means the disorder that they were attributing to Burma, our duty in such circumstances is tolerably clear. It is to terminate a political and commercial nuisance on our frontier. So Burma is a nuisance to the British. To terminate a political and commercial nuisance on our frontier, the frontier of the British Empire in India, of course, by extending to Upper Burma the mild and beneficent rule of the government of India, under which hundreds of millions of men, once victims of perennial disturbance, now enjoy tranquil prosperity. So the British have a responsibility to bring to the Burmese the prosperity and tranquility that the poor Indians in their hundreds of millions had been without until the British came along. So that's the British point of view on all of this. The British head upriver in force. They can move much more quickly than, because they were ready and they had planned all of this out and they were mobilized. They moved much more quickly than the Burmese could possibly have anticipated. And the Burmese did not grasp that they were about to be invaded. And so there was hardly any resistance at all because the Burmese weren't ready. They weren't mobilized. They didn't get what was happening to them. So this photograph that we're looking here is taken on the day of the British landing in Mandalay. The British, of course, had photographers with them. There's essentially no resistance. They just pull up and get off their boats, and the Burmese are standing around looking at them. There had been a little resistance before this, but by the time they get to Mandalay, there's essentially no resistance. the British march to the royal palace. The king has already agreed to surrender by telegraph because he realizes that there's no hope, and the British have promised not to harm him but to send him into exile, and that is what happened. The king asked, when the British got there and marched into the palace, the king asked for a couple of days to pack, and the British said no, and hustled the king and his court out of there. And there had been no resistance. There was very little fighting when the British came in. But then, after the king was gone, there was enormous disorder in Mandalay and in the countryside because the Burmese people saw one regime collapsing and another regime not yet established and in control. They didn't know what was going on. So all the bandits came out. There was looting. Everybody who had any, old feud with anybody else started fighting. The British went in force to try to stop this fighting. They probably went overboard. That made people more angry, so there was then attacks on the British. So it was one of these escalating situations where you massacre some of my people, and then I massacre some of your people to teach you a lesson, and then you have to teach me a lesson back, and so on. So it's going back and forth. And this is a photograph, obviously made by a British photographer, of presumably a temple that has gone up in smoke. Here's the monks. Here's a damaged Buddha image. Here's a damaged fragment of the kind of couch that was used in noble homes and in monasteries. We have one in the show, and I'll show it to you in a minute. But I just wanted to emphasize by this photograph that there was great looting. The palace was looted by the people of Mandalay and apparently by British soldiers and so on. So there was great disorder. And then later, here's one of the main throne rooms of the palace after it's been made into the British Officers' Club. You remember that two of the main throne rooms of the palace, one is turned into the Anglican Church and the other one is turned into the Officers' Club. So here's the Burmese throne that we saw before with the potted plants, and back of here someplace are the billiard tables and so on after it's been turned into the Officers' Club. Later on, 20 years after this, the Governor General said, get out of there. You should never have put the Officers' Club in the Royal Palace. This is very, very bad strategy. This is not the way to win friends and influence people, and so on and so on. But at first, it was turned into the Officers' Club. And then here's a view of a building in a Burmese temple that was commandeered by the British Army for barracks, and you can see the jumble of stuff, offering containers, tennis rackets, swords, bits of sculpture, bits of cloth, a pith helmet, some more sculpture, Buddha images, and so on. This is the stuff that the British soldiers have collected up. Either, I don't know whether they looted it or they bought it or they just picked it up or what, but the British soldiers are getting all kinds of stuff, and here it is, higgledy-piggledy, in the barracks. Big royal parasol, we're seeing the inside, just all kinds of things. And then to jump forward, so Mandalay is no longer the capital of the country. The British had their capital at Rangoon, and now Rangoon becomes the capital of the whole country. British shops and so on, European shops start to appear everywhere. This one is in Mandalay. Felice Beato, an Italian photographer who had been in Burma making photographs and selling them to Burmese and to the European market. He sets up a photography and curio store. There's a branch in Mandalay, here it is, and there's a branch in Rangoon too. And these were the places where foreigners or Burmese could go to buy handicrafts, buy photographs, buy antiques, and so on. So by the 1890s, there's a market in big, nice, well put together stores where you can go and buy antiques or buy recently made handicrafts and so on. And this is part of the story of our exhibition, the commodification of artworks and handicraft, when they go from being things that are made for their original purpose to being things that are made for a market. It could be a Burmese market or it could be a foreign market, but they've gone from their original purpose to being decorator items or curios rather than whatever their original purpose was. And of course, these are also the years of the exhibitions, and that's very, very important in the latter half of the 19th century, is when different kinds of Asian artworks and Asian crafts and artisanal objects are being shown in different ones of the international World's Fairs and exhibitions. So here's an exhibition in Calcutta. This must have been set up, because this is before the fall of Mandalay, of course. So this must have been set up by Lower Burma, the part of Burma that was already under British control. But you can see a throne for a Buddha image that's not so different from ours, great wooden replicas of the normally stone figures that would be on stairways and temples. You can see huge ones of these so-called tapestries. They're very, very large cloths covered with embroidery and applique and sequins and so on, and then all kinds of fantastic wood carving. And this was to show off the culture of your place and also to encourage demand for furniture, for handicrafts and so on, to display the high quality of your crafts and furniture and wood carving and so on, so that people would want to buy them. So from one exhibition to another, this leads us to our show, which we'll be doing this fall. And I just quickly want to show you some of the works that are going to be in it. Buddha images and images of the Buddha's main disciples. And since it's from the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, we often have wonderful photographs, like this one, of a Buddha image of this sort in the process of being made in, this would be in Mandalay or in Rangoon, probably more likely Mandalay in the 1890s or something of the kind. And then large wooden sculptures. This one in real life is about 75% as big as the projected image here. In other words, quite large, of the kind of wood carving that would have been on those temple and palace buildings. Perhaps you recognize this crowned figure as a naga. It's got this snake in its headdress. Therefore, we know that it's a royal naga, a naga king in human form, but with the snake in his headdress to remind us who he is. And then other wood carvings. This one in real life is about 5 feet tall, very beautiful and very heavily undercut. The carving goes all the way through from one side to the other, and it would have been something like one of these. These are not exactly the same, of course, but it would have been in something like this position. And then large wooden figures of demigods covered with lacquer and gilding and mirror. All of this stuff is mirror inlay. So when you see them in real life, they're very, very glittery because they are completely encrusted with this mirror inlay. And here's a photograph of where they might have been. This is in a Burmese temple. This photograph is taken about 1890 or 1900 in Rangoon, a tiered base with deities on it, and again it's probably a reference to the Mount Meru system. And these figures up here are rather like in type these. I'm not saying they're identical, but I'm just suggesting the context of these originally. Then the very familiar and beautiful Burmese manuscripts, never to be mistaken for manuscripts anyplace else, because these manuscripts of pages that inside have sometimes cloth, sometimes paper, most frequently palm leaf, covered with layers and layers and layers of lacquer, and then gilded decoration, and then this very heavy, sticky, lacquer-like ink in which the text is written. These are only made in Burma and certain places in northern Thailand, so they're very characteristic. And this is a particularly good one with a couple of pages of illustrations. Here's a detail of the illustration that I was just showing you, and you recognize Prince Siddhartha, the great departure, leaving his father's palace. And then here in the next scene from the next illustrated page of this, here's Prince Siddhartha using his sword to cut off his hair as he renounces his princely status and renounces the world and becomes a mendicant. And these kinds of manuscripts were made and bought by families and donated to monasteries when the son of the family was taking holy orders to become a monk himself. And during that ceremony, of course, the young man's hair is shaved off, and everyone is aware of the connection between this episode of the young bodhisattva cutting off his hair as a symbol of renunciation and this actual ritual in the actual lead up to the ordination, when the young man's, he doesn't cut it off himself, somebody else helps him cut off his hair and shave his head. His mother and father are there as the attendants to receive his hair as it is shaved off, but everyone is aware of the parallel with this. Then here's the couch that I was mentioning to you before. We saw a fragment of one in that view of the looted and destroyed temple. This is from Doris Dukes, and David Buchanan will be telling us at another time about some of the further back history of this couch, which is very, very interesting. It can be traced a little bit back beyond Doris Duke. Wooden, lacquered and gilded, covered with mirror inlay, quite a gorgeous thing. We made the cushion for it, but there's a surviving one of these that has its cushion in the Victoria and Albert, and so we sort of emulated the cushion of the one in the Victoria and Albert. And again, because we're in a period of photography, there are wonderful photographs of couches just like this being sat on by, as it tells us here, the Burmese prince and princess. This is actually a postcard, and we have this postcard. Natasha Reichel found it at some shop in Berkeley someplace, and it's a postcard that was printed in, I think, 1903. It has the printing date on it, and it's got this photograph on it. And here's another one. So another possible use of this kind of couch for showing the reclining Buddha, his two main disciples, and other figures standing around him. So we can often get a very vivid idea of the original context of some of these objects. Then the wonderful Burmese offering vessels. This one probably earlier and not for aristocratic use. This one later and probably for noble or aristocratic use. In real life, this one is about as big as it is here. So some of these things are really big. And of course, they divide here. This is the lid. You can take the lid off to put things inside when you take them to the temple and present them as offerings. And again, there are photographs of these kinds of things in use. These are smaller ones, but here the Burmese damsels with presents of rice and curry for the ponjis. Ponji is a Burmese word for monks. So we can see these kinds of objects in use. Amazingly elaborate, gilded, wooden and metal, gilded, lacquered, gilded, and studied with little glass jewels and mirror inlay. This is probably meant to be the Buddha's begging bowl in an incredibly elaborate ensemble. And, if you're thinking, gosh, that is so wacky, how can they stand things that are so ornate? Remember the 1870s. This is high-style New York City in about 1870, the most expensive furniture that you could buy in New York City in 1870. So, remember Victorian furniture in England and Civil War period and after furniture in the United States is enormously, enormously ornate. There's a worldwide preference for extremely ornate and sumptuous furniture. So it's not just the Burmese having this kind of general taste. Then theatrical masks for not this exact character. I'm just showing that to you to give you an example. Of course, in the theater, the costumes reflect those royal costumes that we saw early on. A very nice Burmese marionette that could be as much as 80 or 90 years old. And here's a view of the marionette theater. And it looks like we are going to be able to bring about 4 puppeteers from Mandalay with their puppets. They performed, the same troupe performed once in the old building about 10 years ago, and we're bringing back a reduced troupe, and it does look like through the budget we're still going to be able to manage this. So they will be performing in the fall. And then this is our own so-called tapestry, like the one that was on the wall of that display in Calcutta. A combination of applique, embroidery, and stitching on sequins and glass jewels and so on. Scenes from the Legend of Rama. This one is very, very long. It's about 20 feet long, and we're going to show the whole thing and follow the story going through it. And then we see these things in Burmese and Thai restaurants all the time, these black cloth things covered with sequins. They are an old tradition, and some of them are quite good. This one is from about 1900 or 1905, and it's a very good one, very large one. And it's charming because we see this well-to-do couple, and I just wanted to point out to you the elaborate lower garment of gorgeous silk that they're both wearing, and we have a piece of silk, in several, in fact, in the show that will be displayed to make this point. Now, to our own throne. This is up in Gallery 11. It was probably made in Mandalay. It probably came from Mandalay, probably was in a temple in Mandalay at some point, although we don't know anything about its history in detail. I think it's something that the public likes to look at, and we've never really, in docent class or in a public talk, never really approached it. And so I want to spend a few minutes talking about it because it's a very important and interesting object. And it is a throne, and by the way, if you're interested, I have an article from the Journal of the Burma Research Society from 1960 called The Thrones of the Burmese Kings, and I'll put it in the library. It's about 30 pages, and you can read about the regulations in the royal chronicles of when a new throne is being dedicated. It specifies all the members of the royal family and all the officials who have to be there, and it specifies in detail exactly what they have to wear, exactly what they have to say, the whole ritual that goes with consecrating a new throne. It talks about the 9 major royal thrones and the different woods that they have to be made out of, and where you have to go to get the wood, and the ceremonies that have to be said over the wood before it's carved, and while it's being carved, and after it's being carved, and so on. So royal thrones were no joke for the Burmese by any means. So ours has this lower part, this strange wasted middle part, tiers, and then a crowned and bejeweled Buddha image, and then an elaborate upper part. The only other one of these that I know of that's in a museum in the West is this one, even more glamorous, even more beautiful, even more intact than ours, at the Victoria and Albert in London. And they have a lot of records on theirs. They pretty much know where it came from in Mandalay, and theirs has all of these presumably original additional elements that go with it and that came in at the same time. But other than these two, there's not one of these that I'm aware of in a museum in the West. I show you these just to remind you that Buddha images in their original contexts were never by themselves. They were always in some kind of elaborate stand, throne-like thing. Often the original stands, the original throne-like things have been lost or separated from the Buddha images, but this is just to remind you that in lots of different cultures across Asia, Buddha images are always in some kind of throne-like arrangement. The lower part of our throne, and I photographed it just this way to try to get you to notice, if you haven't already, that it's floating. It doesn't touch the ground in the way it's designed. Of course, we know that there are big legs hidden underneath here, but it's intentionally designed in such a way that the legs are hidden so that it has this sense of sort of hovering 10 inches off the ground. It's also possible that these flap things are references to waves, and I'll show you why in a minute. The crowned and bejeweled Buddha image that's at the top, so it's not any old Buddha image, it's a crowned and bejeweled Buddha image. The Buddha is in the guise of a king as he is sitting on this royal throne, and it is a royal throne, as you'll see. And at the very top of the thing, of course, there's a tiered ceremonial umbrella. This is the King and Queen of Thailand 40 years ago or something. But I show you this just to remind you of the idea of these tiered wedding cake-shaped honorific umbrellas, parasols, that attend royalty in Siam and Burma, both Thailand and Burma, both. This is at the top of our one. This is in the palace in Bangkok. But just to remind you that there is this, yet again, symbol of royal sovereignty and power on the top of our throne. Then here's the old photograph that I showed you before of one of the main thrones in the palace in Mandalay. This is a modern reconstruction of it with waxworks, figures representing the king and queen. That's in the, as you know, since the palace was destroyed during World War II, the present awful Burmese government did a kind of a reconstruction of parts of it in the 1990s, and that's what this is from. But notice this wasted part that is like what's on our one, the very elaborate upper part that's different in detail but similar in idea. There are elements on both sides here that have to do with the sun and the moon. So all of this is imbued with cosmological symbolism that I'll show you more of in a minute. The sun and the central axis here is the cosmic axis around which the sun and the moon are understood to be revolving, and so on. And to remind you again of the axial importance of this, this is the famous plate from the book by Michael Symes that was about his diplomatic mission to the court of Ava, which was then the capital of Burma, in 1795. So this is the only representation that exists of the Burmese royal court as early as 1795, and I'm showing only a detail of it. But here's the king sitting on his elaborate throne. There's the wasted part of it, and of course directly over it is this immense tiered tower, emphasizing the axial centrality of the king, the throne, the palace, the capital. And just to remind you that all of this symbolism does go with Buddha images, and in this instance it's not a crowned and bejeweled Buddha image, but here's a Buddha image in a 19th century photograph in a temple in Mandalay. You can't see the lower part very well, but it has that hourglass, wasted, tiered shape, and then the upper part like this, similar to ours. And here's the comparison between ours and the royal one. So this, of course, is this element, etc. Now, focus on this part. There's a series of tiers that step inward, then there's a vertical part, and then they start stepping outward again to create a platform. And what this has to do with is Mount Meru, of course, and the Buddhist conception of how the universe is organized. This is a famous drawing that John Huntington prepared to show the system. Here's Mount Meru, the blue one. As you know, it's surrounded by 8 rings of mountains that get lower as they go out. So this sort of scale-like thing is John Huntington's representation of the rings of mountain ranges that go around Mount Meru. Here's the sun and the moon, which the texts tell us at what level they fall in relation to Mount Meru. And then the Indra's heaven, the heaven of the 33 gods, is at the top of Mount Meru. And then there's a whole succession of increasingly abstract heavens going above the heaven of the 33 gods. And down below, there's a series of increasingly horrible hells in tiers going below. Here's the 8 rings of mountains, then there's oceans around them, then there's continents. These are sets of continents, and as you know, it's on one of these sets of continents that we live. So there's us right there. And then, as John indicates, there's a gold disk underneath all of this, and then a water disk. So that wave-like aspect of the lower part of our throne could, we don't know, there's no evidence, but it could be referring to the idea of the entire structure sitting over a level of water. This is also a John Huntington drawing from a very recent article of his that's in the most recent either Arts of Asia or Orientations, a simplified version where he's showing how even a rather simple throne pedestal for a Buddha image reflects Mount Meru, the lower paradises. Akanishta is one of the high levels of paradise. The mundane plan of existence and so on. You can't get these to match up exactly. If you start counting levels on our throne, or at least I haven't been able to so far, if you can figure it out, please let me know. I can't get the details to match up exactly, but the general idea is there and is, I think, incontrovertible. To show that this very idea exists in a Burmese context, this is an illustration from a Burmese cosmological manuscript that was published a few years ago. And in this article, which is published in English, it translates all of this stuff, and it makes clear that Tavatimsa heaven is right here, and then it names off the other successions of heavens going up, and the successions of earth, and then hells underneath going down. So this stepping inward and then stepping outward arrangement, there it is, in a Burmese cosmological manuscript, paralleling what's actually on our throne. And to make the comparison, I'm almost done now, make the comparison with Thailand, because some of these same ideas are going on in Thailand too. This is the so-called Emerald Buddha, the great, the most famous, the most powerful Buddha image in Thailand. On this very elaborate throne-like arrangement. And again, you can't get it to parallel Mount Meru in detail, but there is a row of Garudas here, and so on and so on. Down below, there's Nagas, there's other symbolic things that indicate that there's an awareness paying attention to the levels and the suggestion of Mount Meru. But even more conclusive than that, look at the paintings on the back wall of this building in back of it. These are paintings. So this is the real three-dimensional thing, and these are paintings. This is the ocean. These are the 8 rings of mountains around Mount Meru. And Mount Meru is actually depicted in the painting back of here. We can't see it because the upper part of the throne structure is in the way, but it's actually there. You understand that the rings, this one and that one, we're seeing it in cutaway. So these were, that plus that indicate the ring, and then that one and that one indicate the ring, and so on. And this is the ocean in which the ranges of mountains are situated within this ocean. So in the Thai context, as well as in the Burmese context, there's absolutely no doubt that there's all kinds of multi-level cosmological symbolism placing the crowned and bejeweled Buddha image, crowned and bejeweled. The emerald Buddha does not have its own, there are not crowns and jewels carved into it, but they are made out of actual jewelry and put on it. The crowned and bejeweled Buddha image has all of these kingly attributes, and the king has Buddha-like attributes too, of course, and placed within this context of the placing the Buddha image at the center of the universe, the throne that it's on, emphasizing the fact that this place symbolically is the center of the universe, and the sun and moon, the stars, the mountain ranges are all circling around this throne. So we're done, thank you. I just want to remind you again of the exhibition and to say what we've talked about in these endless hours that I seem to have been blabbering on about this is only a third of the exhibition, because the exhibition is Burma, the Shan states and northern Thailand, and Siam, and we've only talked about Burma. So come back another time if you can stand it, and we'll talk about Siam. Thanks, everybody.